Hey there, third graders. Instead of Mrs. Brown on the couch, it's now Mrs. Brown in front of a fireplace. And today we're going to be talking about Greek architecture. So architecture just means how different civilizations built their buildings. So I'm going to show you, if you look on the side here, you'll see some of the most well-known buildings left from ancient Greece. And I'm just going to scroll through for a second, and I want you to see if you notice something that most of them have in common. So we've got the Temple of Zeus, we've got the Parthenon, we've got Odeon of Herodes in the Acropolis, we've got the Temple of Hera, Temple of Artemis, there's a theater, Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Remember learning about Delphi in our Greek maps. Slightly more modern, although this was still before the Lord was born. Hephaestus and the Acropolis again. So what I hope you noticed is that all of those examples of architecture had columns on them. Those things here's a really good example of the columns in the front of the building. We still use columns in a lot of our buildings today, and there's actually 3 different types of columns that I'm going to show you what the differences are, how to tell them apart, and we're going to actually try drawing some of them. So make sure you have a piece of paper, and you're going to be drawing 3 different types of columns to the best of your ability. Some are easy, some are not. So you'll get a chance to challenge yourself a little bit. So make sure you have a piece of paper. If you want, you can divide it into 3 sections, and we are going to learn about the different types of Greek columns. Before we start learning about the different types of capitals, though, let's learn about the different parts and what they're called so we can use the right terminology. The bottom of the column is called the base, and then the tall part that comes up from it is called the shaft, and at the top is the capital. Now the capital comes from, the word capital comes from the word for head. That is why capitals of countries are where the heads of the countries are. If you think about it as a person, the head is at the top, the body is like the shaft, and the base is like the feet. So we've got the head, the main body or the shaft, and the base or the feet. So those are the words that we're going to use as we talk about our different types of columns. Our first type of column, which is also the first type of column that the ancient Greeks learned how to make, is called the Doric column. So I'm going to just write the word Doric so we can remember that that's what it's called. You're going to want to remember these names for later. The Doric has only 2 parts. It's the most simple column. If you look at the top, the capital, you can see it's just kind of rounded and just joins with a little, sometimes it has a square at the top, sometimes it doesn't have a square at the top. The shaft goes down in a slight curve, and there's actually no base at the bottom of the capital. So let's try drawing a Doric column. This will be the easiest column to draw. So if you want to start the capital, that's probably the easiest part. Some of them have that little square at the top that connects to the roof, and then we just have a curve going down, and then we have the shaft that goes all the way to the bottom. And if I draw the floor, then we can see there's no base. You can also notice, you can see that there's what are called flutes carved in, like lines going down the side. That was true for most of their columns as well. So pause if you want to, take in a minute to draw and label your Doric column. Our next type of column, which was the next type that the Greeks invented, is called the Ionic column. We'll write Ionic at the top. And there are some important things about the Ionic column. First of all, if you notice, you'll see there's 2 scroll shapes that are on either side of the column. And the way I remember Ionic columns is that just like you have two eyes, the Ionic column has two scrolls that kind of remind me of eyes. There are some smaller details too, like these designs here. The other thing that isn't shown in this picture is that the Ionic column has a base, unlike the Corinthian column. So let's try drawing a basic Ionic column, starting at the capital. So we will make a scroll, a spiral on one side, and then a spiral on the other side. I'm going to just kind of draw a line right here to keep it simple. If you want to try a little more complicated stuff in there, you can. Then we have the shaft with the flutes in it. And at the very bottom, just a rectangular base, which would go between the column and the floor. So pause if you want to. I'm actually going to erase the doodles. That way, if you want to see the details more clearly, you can. So pause for a minute if you want and finish drawing your Ionic column. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have the Corinthian columns, named after a city called Corinth. Corinthian. All right, so let's take a look at the Corinthian columns. Also not seen, but an important part is that the Corinthian columns did have a base at the bottom. But man, look at that fancy stuff. These were supposed to be a symbol of acanthus leaves. These guys have a little eagle in them, which is not necessarily true for all Corinthian columns. But this was the most recent of the columns and obviously the most complicated. So let's give it our best try to draw a Corinthian column. So I'm actually going to do the shaft first. I'm going to start with things that feel easy for me and work my way up to things that are feeling a little harder. So here's the shaft. I'm going to add the base at the bottom with those lines. And then let's give a try for those acanthus leaves. I'm seeing they do like a kind of a curve here, and it looks like there's a couple layers of them, almost like the capital is supposed to look like it's growing, and then it would of course connect to the top of the building like that. I can make it more complicated. If you're a good detailed drawer, you might want to pause for a while and really notice some of those details on the capital of the Corinthian column. But yes, it will be the most challenging column to do. It was the most recent and the fanciest of all the Greek columns. So those are our 3 types of Greek columns. One of these days when you are allowed out and around, you can see these in lots of places. If you go to big museums, they often have columns at the front. And if you look at the top at the capitals, you're going to see if they are Doric or Ionic or Corinthian. So we'll be doing some more activities with different Greek columns. I'm looking forward to seeing your awesome pictures.